It's finally almost time for the next season of League of Legends, and with the next season and all the crazy changes that are coming with it, especially this year, there's quite a bundle of changes. Also comes with all the best teams in the world switching their rosters around in an attempt to try to make sure Faker doesn't get a third World Championship in a row. I probably don't think he will, but he's made me look wrong too many times. So at this point, he could win 6 in a row, and I can't really be surprised anymore. However, I've got to say, in my 10 plus years of following League of Legends, this might be the best offseason I've ever seen, especially for the best teams. It's not like LPL and LCK each have like 8 or 9 really good teams that could win it. You don't really want that anyway, because that just means that there's less quality, less super good teams all around the board, where it's just like one good player or a couple good players are in each team, and it's just way less quality. Shout out to the LEC. But 3 to 4 of the LPL and LCK teams, I think, have a chance to potentially win the split, seeing how things go. You have Ruler, the best ADC in history, going to Jiejie to play with Chovy again. Obviously, T1 lost Zeus. He went to Hanwha to strengthen their lineup, and Doran came to T1. But, still 4 out of the 5 of the World Championship roster staying together. I still say that's pretty impressive. The LPL, you've got what do you've got? You've got the BLG team staying together. Okay, Jun left. He's on this new JDG team, but you still got Wei, and they won the summer split with Wei, so you can't really say that's too much of a downgrade or even a downgrade at all. This new JDG team, coached by the great CV Max, great and great as a coach, maybe not as great as a person, but do you really need your coach to be a great person? This team's got Ale, Jun, Scout, Pays, and Missing. That team alone, especially if those 4 players minus Missing hit their peaks, and it's not like they're that far away from hitting their peaks. 3 of them are still very young, and Scout's still very productive in his old age. That team could easily look to be winning a championship. You've got this Anyone's Legends team strengthening from their great year before with Tarzan and Flandre. Tarzan has been great domestically, not really internationally, but hopefully one day that will change, and I think he's too good for that to not change one day. You've got Ming and Milky Way playing together on the same team. There's just a ton of great stuff going on. Most of the TES team is still staying together, but I think we can all agree that probably the most hype one of them all is this IG roster, because to start, you've got TheShy and Rookie back together, the 2018 winning lineup together. That is the best solo lane duo in the history of the game. No solo lane duo has ever hit a peak like them, not just individually for both players, but both hit their peaks pretty much at the same time, which made that team so unbelievably fun to watch. And there probably certainly hasn't been 2 players with as much quality for as many years. TheShy a little bit more debatable, but his peak still was a decent while on that team. So even though it's been kind of a couple of years since TheShy, Rookie's still been really productive. He just hasn't been on as many good Worlds teams, unfortunately. That alone makes this so much more exciting. But then it's got some other pieces. You've obviously got Jiejie, who after winning Worlds with EDG in 2021 has really become a really solid jungler. He was like arguably maybe not the worst player on that team when it won Worlds, but he's one of the worst. I mean, he did well at World, help them win Worlds, but for most of that split, he wasn't great. But he's really become one of the best junglers in the LPL, and quite an underrated jungler. I don't think we talk about him as much because his teams haven't been doing as much since the EDG team split up in 2022. And then you've got Gala, who I actually feel like I was completely wrong about. I thought Ming was somebody who was doing, managing him in lane and kind of making him to be less of a Chinese ADC, kind of similar to the person we're about to be talking about. But it turns out that this guy just has a ton of skill, and he can just play with a bunch of different people, because I thought his bad beginning of the year in 2021 kind of set the table. So I was wrong about Gala, but he's certainly a player that can still rise. But I think the most interesting player that we have of all of them is the title of this video. It's Meiko. Meiko is the most interesting because even though Shy probably not in the GOAT candidate for top lane as much anymore, just because he hasn't had as many good years. Rookie, you can still argue just from consistency, but I think people are always going to look at Faker's accolades more, and unfortunately they are somewhat steadier above Rookie, so that's going to be kind of a harder debate. I think Meiko is maybe the easiest to make out of all those 5 players for the GOAT debate. That he is probably, and I think I'll be proving with this video, the greatest support of all time, and can continue to build his resume up from there. Now, we kind of forget about Meiko kind of a lot. I mean, we forget about supports in general, and we'll kind of talk about that. But he's just been kind of quietly, doing really well for the last couple of years. And then maybe people haven't noticed him as much as some other supports, maybe someone like Carrier. But I think that all the qualities of him being the greatest player ever are there. I think we got to talk about those because it's, if you're going to have a greatest player in the history of the game on your team, we certainly should know about it. But we also need to understand, because I think a lot of people misunderstand this. They maybe think support is an easy role because you like playing support like O'Kaylee, shout out to Reckless, is relatively easy. Playing at the very, very highest level and understanding all the components that come to being a great support, I think people don't understand. So we got to understand that, and I think understanding those ideas and then all the other intangibles that come with being a great support, plus all the normal things that you need for someone to be in a GOAT debate, the accolades, the consistency, the potential, the innovation, who'd you play with, all that. By the end, I think you'll also realize that Meiko is the greatest support in the history of the game. Now, before talking about Meiko, let's talk about what makes a great support. I think a lot of people think that being a support is very simple, that it's just in the name, support, you're just meant to kind of help your ADC, and a lot of very simple, just kind of good supports who are just decent enough at the skill will just kind of be piloted around by either, one of the shot callers in the game, their mid laner or their jungler, sometimes even the ADC, if the ADC is vocal enough. They not always are. So people think it's just relatively simple and there's not a lot to do. But I think there's a lot more, no, not even think, I know there's a lot more to being a support, not just from my own personal experience playing support and coaching supports, but just the years of different supports I've seen. I'll use a movie example to make the reference a little bit easier. So most of us have seen Wes Anderson's The Grand Budapest Hotel, a great movie in its right. The main character, or the main character is really Ray Fiennes, but the main character, Zero, the lobby boy, there's a little speech about him being a lobby boy, and it goes, "A lobby boy is completely invisible, yet always in sight. A lobby boy remembers what people hate. A lobby boy anticipates the client's needs before the needs are needed. A lobby boy, above all, is discreet to a fault." I think that's exactly the essence of what a support is. Support is someone that does many jobs, plugs many holes on the ships, fills many different positions, can play a ton of different kinds of champions, ones that are, more engage heavy, ones that are more enchanter heavy, sometimes ones that are more, damage heavy, skill shot heavy. Now, after the last seasons, you can even play ADCs and then be considered support. Ashe, Caitlyn, Callista, the list can continue to go on. And I think supports get less credit for doing good and get more hate for doing poor. Like, a good play versus a bad play, more people will notice the bad play versus the good play. It's why everyone looks at someone like On or Hylissang, and when they see these like crazy flashes or crazy engages, because it's something you can understand, you're like, okay, that went in and that was good. That's a good thing. But I think most of the plays that a support makes are small movement plays. I think positioning in the lane is something that's very underrated. Just the simple movements, the simple actions to do to help your ADC. I think the support is very tactical. There always has to be some level of shot calling components, some level of working with the jungler. Obviously, there's a great deal of range and champions that needs to be played. And I think the biggest part is still, at the end of the day, working with your ADC. The ADC is probably going to be the person that does the most damage at the end of the game. The meta's always changing around, especially when ADCs were being played mid a lot of the times and we're doing the most damage. But, the standard is still that the ADC is going to be the DPS person of the team. And it is the job of the support to manage that person while manage everything else on the map. And I think it's actually a lot harder to manage, not just any laner, but as mainly the ADC for what their job is to do. To understand that a little more, I think we can now see like, okay, this is what entails being a support. So not only can we talk about why Meiko is the best support ever, we'll compare him to some other great supports and see how he matches up in history and why I think he's now at the point where he can surpass them as the greatest ever. So Meiko's career begins in 2015 when he joins the title-winning org EDG and plays there for the next 8 years. He originally joins from just an amateur team that just played in a bunch of those Chinese tournaments. There were so many different official Chinese league tournaments that go on where all different teams, LPL and non-LPL teams, would play each other. So this was his first foray into official competition. He replaces a legend in FZZF, the old WE support who retired. And then we also got to know kind of about the ecosystem of what the LPL was like at this time. So this was when the big Korean exodus happened, where all 10 of Samsung White and Samsung Blue's teams, Samsung White obviously being the world champion of that year, their entire team went to China, pretty much just to chase money. But that was kind of the beginning of when we would first see, insane amounts of money dragging people into China for the very first time. Obviously, Korea being the best region at the time, it's no wonder why people would go there. A couple other players from Korea went there, obviously most notably Rookie, who's obviously been probably the best one to come from that. But at the time, these two Samsung teams coming here was huge, and two players came to EDG. You have Deft from Samsung Blue and Pawn from Samsung White going to this EDG team. So Meiko's first ever ADC he's going to be playing with is Deft. And this is somewhat pre-Great Deft. If anything, as we talk about Meiko, it'll actually, if anything, boost his stature, because I think he's a bit of the reason why Deft's best years, arguably his best years, were on EDG, or at least some of them close to it. Deft was still absolutely a legend at this time, was on this amazing Samsung Blue team, this incredible team fighting team, was great at that, even though he didn't know how to play the lane, one of the things that Meiko would help him with. So your first time playing professionally and you're with this guy. But he wasn't originally playing with Deft right away because he was just the support on the bench to start. A guy called Mouse, who maybe people nowadays don't know, but actually would be the top laner in 2016 for EDG, so he would swap roles. He was the first man playing support. And why they decided to bring Meiko in isn't actually quite sure. Because back in the day, less information was kind of known about the LPL. Famously, the stream for the LPL in the beginning, this was the first year that Riot was officially doing it, didn't even have player cams or anything. It was pretty much just people in casters in Oceania watching the games. Only could get so much information other than that. During the game, Papa Smithy, who was casting, literally says, "Oh, there's this guy Meiko on the team. We don't really know anything about him." But in that game, obviously people talk about Faker's first game and the play he makes. Not as in this play in Meiko's first ever professional game isn't as sane as Faker's, but it's certainly something to behold. In his first ever game as an amateur, in professional, playing, his first ever game from not being an amateur to being a professional. He's playing with Deft, a legend at the time. A Korean ADC who probably doesn't even speak that much Chinese at that point. A play happens rather early in the game. While Meiko goes to war, Deft does his classic thing and gets caught by a bubble. So Meiko flashes in after getting hit by the Nami tidal wave, ults Kid away on the Corki while he's in the middle of a Valkyrie. They kill him. Koro is able to then, the top laner, able to come in, TP, and then the team is able to get a winning fight from there. That's your first ever big play, and it's, comes 10 minutes into your career starting with a guy who doesn't even speak English. He literally flashed down and saved Deft, saved Deft a little bit. He still ended up dying, but the fact he was able to use the Janna ult, a champion that usually isn't aggressive, to effectively insec the Corki into a corner and get the kill is something that you don't expect players who play for a couple years to make, let alone a guy who doesn't speak the same language as his ADC and has only been playing professionally for 10 minutes. If that's not the start to a great career, if not the greatest career a support's had, I don't know what you could call it. That split he would end up winning with EDG, and the career only gets better from there. After winning, he goes to MSI and win MSI the first time a big international tournament has been won by a Chinese team. Still relatively early, but still a big accomplishment. Yes, we can always talk about how that tournament result is for EDG is a bit fraudulent because Jiejie got played the first 3 games in the best-of-5 series instead of Faker. They probably would have won because of it. It wasn't just because of the crazy Game 5 pick where Faker picked LeBlanc, which he had never professionally lost on, and then Pawn picks Morgana, which, by the way, I watched that game. That wasn't the nullifying pick because Faker just couldn't do as much in lane or kill Pawn, which he wasn't really able to do anyway. That Morgana was a bit of an overrated thing. It didn't really do much in that game. It was kind of a wasted pick, but they still won anyway. That's a whole nother discussion, though. We're talking about Meiko. Meiko would win MSI and then win, obviously, after winning his first ever split, he would win 3 more splits, at least so far in his career. His career is amazingly still going. You've got 2016 summer, you've got 2017 summer and 2021 summer. 2021 summer, of course, leading into his big result, which is a 2021 Worlds title. But he's also has 7 Worlds appearances and only not making it out of the group stage 1 time. And the maybe most underrated result about Meiko is he has 5 Demacia Cup titles in a row. Back in 2015, 2016, but even before that, Chinese tournaments were often played during the LPL splits. It was all kind of a fluid thing, but as Riot kind of took more control in the Asian regions, those tournaments all went away, and Demacia Cup was really only became an off-season tournament. But it was a very big tournament, as a lot of these old Chinese tournaments were. It was like when WE in late 2020, excuse me, not 2020, 2012 won, I don't know, like 4 or 5 tournaments in a row, and we're like on an insane 40-something game win streak. I don't remember the number exactly, but for the time, because not all of the not all of the international tournaments were as prestigious at the time and had all the best teams. Winning all these Chinese tournaments was a big deal. So Meiko winning 5 Demacia Cups in a row with lots of different teammates, I think gets forgotten in history a lot. That is a major achievement and should be added to his long amount of accolades he has. There's actually one more important detail that needs to be added to Meiko's accolades. In his now 10 years of playing professionally, his 9 seasons at EDG, his now just 1 season at Top Esports, in 20 splits of LPL, he has only not made it to playoffs 1 time, and that was in the summer of 2020, and his team barely didn't even make it to playoffs, and that was also a very weak year for that team anyway. It's before they got Jiejie, it's before they got Flandre, and it's before they got Viper. So, 20 seasons and only to miss playoffs once, and abundance of different top 3s and top 4s to go with it, that just adds to his giant amount of consistency in his results. Now let's talk a little bit more about what makes a great support and some of the intangibles that go into the role, some of which is what makes Meiko the player that he is. To start off, anyone who analyzes really any role, but certainly the support role, I think people would often start with the eye test. They would say, okay, let's look at this guy. Just based on what we see, what is he able to do? Well, the support obviously can have, show to have very good eye test. Mad Life, my favorite support ever, is obviously probably the king of the eye test in terms of what a support can do. A lot of players that people talk about when it comes to greatness of support now, at least what Plug fans say, people like Hylissang or On, when they see these like crazy flashes and crazy plays, you say, oh, that's the eye test there, that, that player is clearly great. But I think the eye test is very functional, but it needs to be adjusted a little bit to truly tell when a great player is. Because I think watching someone like Meiko play, you got to understand why he does things the way he does and then why he doesn't do certain things. Because he's not like a very aggressive player. He absolutely passes the eye test at times. He flashes in and engages for his team. Many plays he's done that. He's got just on the eye test alone in terms of his engages and his his slows and stops he had in the world final when he was playing champs like Zillion and Rakan. Just watching that alone, it's just great eye test stuff, how he was able to help win his team fights. But I think part of the eye test, people will see like 1 or 2 great engages and think that person is great, but you got to watch a whole array of things. Meiko isn't an always engaged player. He's one who does things. It also goes a little bit more into an underrated aspect, I think, just not only of the game, but certainly of support, is lane positioning. It's where you are in regards to your ADC, where you are in regards to whoever you're in lane with. If you're roaming on the map, if you're setting up a fight, do you want to be a little bit more forward and push the enemy team off? Do you want to be a little bit more back or on the side in terms of so they don't see you and then engage from that way? I think all of that is super important because as a support, you are often, reacting based on either how your team is going to act or how the enemy team acts. And you're watching the enemy team so very closely. Something Meiko is great at. He watches enemy laners and enemy teammates so well and reacts very well. There's plays where, especially recently with Jiejie, where people will go in on Jiejie and then he will kind of go like immediately flash in and go in on the ADC, because even if Jiejie's in a tough position, it makes sure that the ADC is kept off, and if Jiejie or any ADC gets off of the support, they can then go in on the ADC, because obviously the main idea for the support is keep the ADC off of anyone to keep them from killing. Certainly that's how it is in the lane. So eye test, he certainly passes. I think in general that maybe some people pass the eye test more. I mean, if you in any sport, if you just go based on purely the eye test, I don't think that you see the greatest players ever. Sometimes you do, but there's got to be a little bit more. There's got to be understanding of why he goes in the way he does. And I think that's what makes him so great, is that he's a very cautious player, but needs to engage when he needs to. We can obviously then segue that into the champion pool, because support is maybe a little bit more underrated of a champion pool. Supports sometimes play just the same couple things, but obviously the support is meant to play what the team needs. But in the case of Meiko, because he's played 10 plus years, you can see all the different champions. He's played every different meta, from when it's mages, from when it's engagers, and I think importantly, he will play mages sometimes as engagers. An underrated aspect of support is not only playing, but like you play a certain champ, but you have to play it how your team needs it. Sometimes as a player, you're going to be maybe on a champion that's a little bit less, aggressive, something less engagey, something like the Janna, maybe a champion like Renata or Lulu, some of these mages like that. But sometimes you'll still be required to be aggressive. If your team is set up where the support is often the engager or the shot caller. In the case is Meiko is a shot caller for most of his career. Kind of early on he wasn't, obviously, because he was playing with Clearlove for most of this time, and he was kind of working in conjunction with him. Sometimes people underrate the fact that it's not just about playing the champion to everything it needs, it's what your team needs you to do with that champion. And then sometimes there are scenarios where Meiko needs to, be a little bit more forward on champions that don't seem it. Sometimes that's a little bit more required in the game. If you have an ADC who's a little bit more aggressive and you're playing something that's a less aggressive champion, like this Jiejie play I was talking about before, which I forgot what game I was referencing in. I think it was actually the first game he played with Jiejie. It was against BLG this year in 2024, where he had to flash forward as the Renata to get that. Renata does have a grab, but she's obviously not a champion that you're used to seeing be front and forward as much. But I think one of the most important aspects of the game is that knowing that you're not just locked to what your champion is supposed to do, engage or peel and support. It's about what your team needs you to do on that champion, and Meiko, I think, was one of the best players ever on that. Anything you give him, he can do great on. You even come to this meta where, at least this year's meta, where it was a little bit more, it was really, I guess, this year and last year, where Keria made it more ADC potent, where things like Ashe, things like Callista, there's another big, I guess Caitlyn was really only played by Keria, so that one doesn't count as much, but being able to play a champion like Ashe, when Meiko's played so many champions in his career, but when you're not used to it, is a really impressive skill in itself. There's a game, it was this summer, or maybe it was spring. I actually forget which area it was, but it was Weibo versus TES, and Meiko just has a ton of great plays on this Ashe where he's kiting back and fighting, and then using that, the fact that he's kiting and then slowing people and then getting his team to engage from that. It seems easy to play a champion like Ashe. She's you don't have to do much as a support because you have a bunch of moves that's slow. But kiting is not a natural thing that a support player has. You know, you played for 10 years and you're not used to being able to kite back, moving, clicking, moving, hitting, that all these ADCs can do. But Meiko, like, amazingly played it so well. I mean, this was, you know, a new meta, and it kind of really showed, you know, what support players could play in very varying metas, when, you know, usually they're only playing a certain type of champion. You know, it's like the solo lanes are a little bit more expansive in terms of what they play. Obviously, ADCs were played mid this year, but, you know, other supports couldn't do it at the same time. You know, people would play like Kalista support and absolutely fail on it, but I think it just shows that Meiko isn't just a great support player, he's a great all-around player, and whatever you give him, he can absolutely play to near perfection. But of course, at the end of the day, a support still needs to help the ADC do as well as possible in the game. That is why we call the role the support. So, what ADCs did Meiko play with throughout his career? He's certainly got a lot of peaks and a lot of valleys when it comes to the level of the ADCs he played with. Obviously, at the start, he played with Deft, and I think that Deft's success, not just later in his career, but certainly at the point in his EDG career, his 2 years there, is not in part thanks to Meiko. He was a really bad later when he was in Samsung Blue, dying a lot. He had a really good support, a guy named Hart. He didn't really play much after the Samsung Blue team, but he was more kind of used as Dade was the mid laner, the shot caller. He was kind of used on the map, kind of all across. This was in a lane swap meta, especially when the jungler and the top would kind of go around and do like early dragons or early camps together. The support would often roam around in that regard as well. So he didn't have as much help in the lane. Meiko kind of stayed with him in the lane a little bit more, especially as lane swaps became, you know, were still a thing, but they were always like with the support and the ADC often getting the turret at the top very early on with the jungler, and was a little bit less roam heavy. Deft was able to do not just super well in the team fights, which he was known for in Samsung Blue, but in the early game as well to get fed. I think Meiko was able to help balance him out, engage when he needed to pull him back, especially as we know he became the main shot caller as his career went on. He was probably still a shot caller now. We can't know exactly for sure, but I'm sure he had some level of vocal input early on, even though Clearlove was the main shot caller. And that there's no doubt that helped him a bit. I mean, if you just look at Deft in EDG versus him, you know, in season 4, you can tell how much he grew as a player, and Meiko's thanks to that. Then after Deft left, he played with a guy called Zet. No, not the famous Swedish CS 1.6 player, played for the NIP in like 2005 and 6 and all that. Not that guy, just a random Korean ADC who didn't really do much, and he was kind of the stepping stone before they got iBoy. And well, iBoy and Hope at the same time. Yes, the very same Hope who was on Jiejie in 2022 and is on Anyone's Legend now. Now, iBoy, who actually was still in the league recently, he played for Rare Adam when the team got 4th in, was it 2020? I think it was summer 2021. Yeah, they got 4th place with Fofo and Hong as the support. iBoy is a Chinese ADC. And what I mean by that, you know, maybe not everyone understands the term Chinese ADC. Chinese ADC is you go in. You're the engager, not trying to be intentionally, like you just go in without thinking and just try to get as many kills as possible. I mean, it's pretty much how Uzi does, but you know, the best Chinese supports are the ones able to go inside and crazy and then tone it back. Uzi not always able to do that, but iBoy has never been a good player in his career. Yet Meiko in both 2017 and 2018, Hope, who was like 17, 18 at the time, very young, inexperienced, would get subbed in when iBoy would have his bad games, but didn't really like play enough, just played a little bit with Meiko. But iBoy was able to make it to Worlds and even win one split under Meiko. I don't think that is as big of an achievement as people, or how do you say it? It's a very understated achievement, and people need to talk about it more. Winning with a player like that in a not just a region that's very difficult, but with the toughest role lane in the entire region. I mean, Chinese ADCs are very known, and the players he had to play against, people like Uzi, people like, oh crap, what else would have been at the time? LWX wasn't yet. God, let me think of that actually. I'm probably gonna cut this here. I guess Mystic would be one. Mystic was more of a passive player, but he was still, good in his own right. Who else would, I mean, who made Worlds? It was EDG, RNG, and IG. Oh, and of course he had to play against Jiejie. I mean, they still made it to Worlds even having to play against Jiejie. So iBoy had to play against so many better, iBoy and Meiko had to play against so many better support in ADCs, and he was able to kind of tame the wild beast. I mean, you also got to think about a support with the ADC. I mean, think of them as like a lion tamer, like somebody riding like a noble steed or a horse, or imagine like a crazy creature like a rhino or something. That the ADC is the crazy rhino who just wants to charge forward, and the support is the guy on the reins, reining him back, controlling him, making sure he's going the right way. That is what the essence of Meiko is. That's the kind of person he was in lane. After they decided, okay, iBoy's shit, why are we still playing with him? Throw him off into the distance. We had hope playing for 2019 and 2020, and this would be kind of the low point of Meiko's career and kind of EDG. Well, maybe in EDG now, but we'll call it Meiko's career. Lowest for EDG at the time. They didn't make Worlds in 2019 or 2020. They didn't even make playoffs at the very end in 2020. Hope was not the player he was now, where, I mean, he had a very high peak in 2022. That was the team around him, of course, though. And then he still looked pretty good in this year. He's been very up and down, but he was still young, and the core around him wasn't the same as like now. Scout is still a very good player and was getting there, but they had new top laners that they were throwing in. Clearlove had retired, and now they were playing with Jiejie. He was brought in summer of 2019 after his time in the EDG U squad, and then Clearlove retired, and Clearlove then becoming a coach. Wasn't really the most successful coach. I don't know. He's as big of an impact as Clearlove has had in the Chinese jungle scene in the LPL. I don't think his time as a coach has been as effective. But anyway, that time with Hope wasn't as good. And then they got Viper. And this is where Viper goes from a very good ADC to arguably best ADC in the world in 2021, between like him and Ruler. I mean, he was just lethal for this team. I mean, you had a very good team around him. Scout was still playing as one of the best mids in the world, probably going to go down as one of the most underrated players ever. Flandre wasn't as good as what he was in Snake Esports, but was a good kind of just be able to support of a top laner, be able to play, these tanks or these like farming top laners to handle the wave, whatever the team needed. And it was a great team for Meiko to use Viper as much as possible to win these team fights. I mean, he's an amazing team fight player. I mean, he was able to do crazy things on Aphelios, and Meiko was able to give him, I think, more structure. He'd already had crazy ADCs going back and forth. I actually forgot to mention one crazy ADC he had. Actually, no, wait, no, excuse me, it was about that. The crazy ADC he's about to have because when Viper leaves. But this is probably the peak time for Meiko. He's absolutely at his best. Viper's, I mean, you could argue Viper's to hit even more ceiling after that, but certainly Viper was able to get more structured and more consistent with Meiko under him. Then after Viper leaves in 2022 and they try to do a return Worlds run, they bring in a couple players, one of which is Leave, the phenom that came from the EGU squad, who looked amazing in LDL and was really exciting. But since they weren't sure about him, they brought back Uzi I. Uzi I, remember, had a little bit of a small comeback when that BLG team, the first exciting team with like Fofo and Weiwei and Crisp, had been made, and Breathe had been made in 2022, and he was one of the ADCs brought back along with Doggo, who's Dog, but that's another topic. And it didn't really work. Uzi I still was having wrist problems. He was already about to have a kid. It was kind of the same thing here. He didn't really get a ton of playing time. He also didn't get a ton of playing time because Leave exploded right off the bat. He showed his skill in LDL. I mean, ADCs are, because it's so mechanic and skill based, you see how good someone is in LDL, and I think that almost always transfers over into the top play right off the bat. However, obviously the scandal that Leave was involved in 2023. Once the Leaf situation happened, they brought in a guy called the Snake to play, who was obviously playing on EDG last year as well, when they were doing absolutely terribly. And then, EDG, after having a really good 2023 spring split, had a much worse 2024 or 2023 summer, made playoffs but didn't really do anything and didn't end up going to Worlds. This Snake guy wasn't really that good. So it obviously then led him to go to TES. Now he's playing under Jiejie Love, and I think at the same time, as he did with Deft, as he did with iBoy, as his Meiko's done with all of his players, I think he made Jiejie Love an even better player. Jiejie Love already had been, I mean, he definitely had been like a quintessential, maybe not quintessential Chinese ADC, but like a, not at the extreme, like, the peak of Chinese ADCs, but like not at like where iBoy was. He was like there, but I don't think he had ever had enough consistency to like rise to the top. But last year he was quite excellent, and I think Meiko's against stability helped him a lot. I mean, Jiejie Love had played with what? Yu Yanja, Mark, Zhuo, Baolan. Those are, I mean, Mark is probably the best one, but Mark is average at bit. None of them even, combine these four supports, they're nowhere near Meiko's level. Nothing like that. He was able to, looking at his numbers, he was able to CS more in lane. He was able to be more involved, Jiejie Love be more involved in the fights in the game. I think all, helped to Meiko, understanding what your ADC is like, if they need to be farming a little bit more, if they need to be in the fights much earlier in the game, if they want to be skirmishing a lot, is really important to know. And as a support, you got to kind of control that. Jiejie Love was able to, along with Tian as well as the other shot caller, able to help Jiejie Love do really well in these fights, and that's why TES was able to do so well. Unfortunately, they got to Worlds and didn't do anything, but my boy Tian is just that good at that. But I think we can see that all different types of ADCs, Meiko has been able to make them good wherever he is. If he's with poor ones, sometimes if he's with really bad ones like Snake, or ones that aren't there like yet, like Hope, there's not a lot he can do. But he was able to get iBoy to win a title, an LPL title, and go to Worlds with him. He made Deft have some of the best years of his career, eventually make Deft arguably the best ADC ever, and he was able to give Jiejie Love one of his most stable and consistent years of his entire career. Of course, if Meiko is going to be a contender for the GOAT, we got to compare him to some of the other greats of all time when it comes to support. So we've got most people's kind of contender for the best, or has been until Meiko's kind of recent year, which was Mata. Probably had the highest intellectual peak, him and Dandy on Samsung White. Probably the highest peak you've ever seen from a team. They were absolutely defined the meta. 2014 Worlds, they were just completely and utterly dominant. No team even was close to being able to figure out what they were able to do. And then Mata had many great years after. He played, I think people forget, obviously he's played with Imp, who was a great support and I think benefited the best under Mata. You have Mata then going to China, where he was at Vici Gaming, also with Dandy. A lot of people forget this. He was playing with Vasily, the very same Vasily who maybe you heard in some scandals. We won't talk about that, but was 2014 at Worlds as well with the LMQ Chinese team that was in America, and that was a whole nother deal. But they were able to actually make fourths in 2015. But not do much in the playoffs either. But they're another topic. And then Mata would play as well with Teddy on T1 in 2019, especially when they were, winning splits. But unfortunately, that was kind of, the 2018-2019 was a lower point in China, especially as the meta was getting redefined by, teams like FPX and teams like G2, who were, abusing weird bot laners and things like that. The whole Garen Yumi scenario, Yasuo in the bot lane. Korea, who was a little bit slower to adapt, didn't really have that yet. So who else is there? There's Mad Life. Mad Life probably, how do you say, not physically, but mechanically probably had the highest peak, but also didn't really play long enough. I mean, he played with some bad ADCs. A guy called Hermes, a guy called Woong, who was in the finals in season 2 with him. Not really significant people. He played with a guy called Space for most of his career, who was a very average AD carry, and even in season 5, when Mad Life was still pretty good, he was doing what he could. So not really enough longevity there. You've got Gorilla. Gorilla mostly played with Prey his entire career. He played in season 4 with Zephyr, but the thing is that Gorilla has never been an engage player. He was always very good on the mages. I mean, he played engagers, but wasn't like the main. He didn't use them to their full effect to be going in. Prey was always the one engaging. Zephyr was always the one engaging. In the old Naj and White Shield team, they would do like Yomu's on Twitch and have him go in when that was a really effective strategy. And then the kind of modern, the other modern one besides Meiko, which is Keria. Keria obviously has a ton of innovation, which we'll talk about in a second, in terms of Meiko. Innovation of the champion pool and how well he used that. I mean, you kind of brought Lux back. He was playing things like Caitlyn and Ashe and all these other ADCs in the bot lane to amazing effect. The Varus as well. Obviously, he's played with two excellent ADCs in Gumayusi and Teddy, as well as even before that, he was playing with Deft, obviously, and has looked, great his entire time. He's probably going to be the one, eventually to catch Meiko. But from all these players, I don't think they had as much time being great as Meiko. I don't think they had as much success with worse people. I think almost any time Meiko had a bad ADC, he was able to, do really well with them. Remember, only one split he didn't make playoffs out of what 19 or 17, something like that, splits he did make playoffs in. You can't not call that a factor. I think one of the reasons that Meiko maybe doesn't get looked at as much as these other guys, as I obviously just talked about, innovation for three of them, for Mata, for Mad Life, and for Keria. Meiko doesn't really have that, but I also don't think that you need to be like an innovator or creator to be the greatest ever. Certainly, it's going to help more. Mata's, probably had the biggest. Mad Life probably had the biggest impact on supports, on like what you could do and how you could pretty much take over the game of support. Carey has kind of shown that as well. He's kind of been the first support since Mad Life to be considered the best in the world. Mata obviously had the biggest impact on the game itself, of how you think of it, how you play with your jungler, how you even use your vision. Remember back when wards, you could buy effectively an infinite number of them. Meiko has just been kind of steadily, consistently, playing excellently. I mean, the greatest football player ever, American football, is Jerry Rice. I don't think a lot of people would say he was like an innovator in any way. He wasn't like doing crazy catches like Randy Moss. He wasn't like the first guy to do touchdown catches like Don Hudson all the way back in the day. You could also say a lot of these apply to Tom Brady as well, since he wasn't like the most gifted ever, but I don't think Tom Brady's the greatest player ever. Jerry Rice is. And Jerry Rice just was steadily consistent the entire time. Innovation's going to help more, but if you've got so much higher consistency throughout your entire career and you're able to play in every different meta, and even take some of the innovations that people were doing at the time, stuff like the supports. We were obviously talking about the Ashe before, and things like, well, he wasn't really playing Callista, but those other ADCs, and if he's able to play those so well, I think that if anything justifies him more as being the greatest ever. But the GOAT debate is always changing. The eye test sometimes is something we use to focus on the other four roles a lot more, as they're often doing a lot more, their champions do a lot more in the game, and sometimes the support's impact is a little bit less seen. So sometimes just taking it back and thinking about, how good the ADC played in lane and all the impacts, all the little bits of warding and, pressure and lane positioning on the map that the support is able to do, kind of helps us justify that more. Things are going to change, certainly. Keria is still playing very well. I mean, he kind of had a worse, not a bad 2024, but just a worse one compared to his 2023. But that doesn't mean he still can't, fight for Meiko for the GOAT debate. They're probably the two who are going to rise at the very ends of both their careers and be considered the top two.